Thanks so much, Liz. Thanks to everyone who's here today for being in the community with us at IEL and the Coalition for Community Schools. We are a small but mighty team with a network of over 15,000 people across this country, across the world, 280 schools, 280 districts, excuse me, over 8,300 schools reaching over 5 million children. So for this particular webinar, we have about 400 people registered from across the country. So I think it speaks to the power of networks, our connections, and just the need to collaborate in this particular moment. So now in our 60th year at IEL, this organization has always changed systems through people, through the transformational development of educators and education adjacent leaders. So as this year comes to a close, we recognize really what lies ahead. And just yesterday, we reported on the Senate attempting to dismantle the Department of Education. We want you to know, just as an organization and as leaders, that we will remain steadfast and committed to advancing community schools, family engagement, and collaborative leadership systems that from both a policy and practice perspective. So I'll be short there. And now it's my pleasure to introduce one of my favorite people, our Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer, Dr. Helen Malone.
Thank you so much, Eddie. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Welcome to our Research Practice Network and Town Hall. Today, we're focusing really on sustainability, and it's designed to elevate practices and strategies of how local, state, and regional communities are both cultivating durable partnerships and sustaining their efforts. So we at IEL, Coalition for Community Schools, remain committed to advocating for community schools, family engagement, youth development, and other critical topics at the federal level. And we also encourage you to share with us what are some of the pressing issues most important to you. We have sent along to you an email. We'll be following up in terms of wanting to learn more from you. During the last Congress, we created a Policy by the People agenda, co-designed with all of you. And we are updating this for incoming Congress. This will really guide the priorities to both inform and guide our advocacy for years to come. And lastly, we remain committed to supporting local and state efforts and creating spaces like these for learning, for sharing, for innovation, and look forward to ongoing opportunities. At this time, it's my pleasure to introduce our two co-chairs for Research Practice Network, who really have been leading the way and who will be facilitating today's conversation. So one is my colleague, Nayora Rimkunis, who is our research co-chair, and also Xavier, who is our practice co-chair, who will be also facilitating and supporting today. So thank you so much for joining us. At this time, I will turn it over to Nayora to introduce our speakers and to get us going. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Helen, and thanks everybody for joining us today. It's terrific to see this turnout. I am Nayora Rimkunis. I am an assistant professor of community schools at Binghamton University, and then very happy to co-chair the Research Practice Network with Xavier. And I'm really excited to welcome our panel today. When we were conceptualizing this town hall, we really wanted to shine a spotlight on sustainability, certainly through the lens of funding. That's always on everybody's mind. But perhaps even more importantly, we wanted to look at sustainability through the lens of partnerships. We know we can fund community schools in a variety of ways. Most of us are doing that already. We're doing that in federal funding, state funding. We'll get into braided, blended funding. But we can't have community schools without strong partnerships. They are what sustain us. And this brought up this idea of durability. And that's why we were really intentional in naming this town hall about durability. What is it that makes community schools so durable? We want to explore that. They're rooted in this century-old social reform movements, grown and built through different administrations and funding allocations, and continue to be tested, and they continue to endure. So we want to look at that a bit more today with our four guests from their different perspectives, including regional approaches and statewide approaches. But just to level set, when we're talking about durability, we're just talking about durability. the ability to exist for a long time without deteriorating in quality or value, the ability to withstand wear and tear and pressure and damage. When we're talking about sustainability, we're talking about financial strategies for long-term sustainability, talking about partnerships, viability of a strategy, the initiative and intervention in our program. When we talk about blended funding, this is where we are combining multiple funding sources into one joint stream with a shared purpose. And then when we're talking about braided funding, which might be what most of us are doing, I don't know, but most of the people I work with in community schools are doing some sort of braided and blended, but the braiding being pooling multiple funding streams with a shared purpose, but we're still separately tracking and reporting on those individual funding streams. So getting a little in the weeds there, but those are the terms that we're working with today. And with that, I'm happy to introduce our guests. We have four. We have Autumn Berg, who is director of the Community Schools Initiative at Chicago Public Schools, where she oversees 107 schools and supports external partners in 117 schools. This includes 3 different models: the Sustainable Community Schools, which is a partnership between Chicago Public Schools and the Chicago Teachers Union. There's also schools funded through 21st Century Community Learning Centers grants, and then also schools funded through full service community schools funding. We have Alexius Ferguson, who is the Assistant Director of Technical Assistance and Evaluation at the University of Central Florida's Center for Community Schools. He's responsible for the management and operations for technical assistance, along with assessment and evaluation. He leads the day-to-day site-facing operations, as well as planning, implementation, and evaluation. And he's also responsible for identifying indicators of program and student success, designing evaluations regarding student and program outcomes, compiling and reviewing those for evaluation, and then reporting to the state. We have Ellie Mitchell, who is the executive director of the Maryland Out of School Time Network, MOST Network, which is dedicated to increasing the quantity and quality of after-school and summer school programs for all young people in Maryland. She's overseen the launch of initiatives focused on inclusion, college and career readiness, STEM, and community schools. She co-chairs the Maryland Education Coalition and serves on the advisory board for Pillar 4 for Maryland's Accountability and Implementation Board for the Blueprint for Maryland's Future. And Jay Roscup. He is the Community Schools Director for the Wayne County Consortium at Sodus Central School District in New York. Currently, he facilitates the New York State Community Schools Thruway Coalition, which is purposed with encouraging the development of cross-sector, county-wide coalitions that create an ecosystem of community schools across the state. As a grant writer, he's secured over $100 million for Wayne County and currently serves as the Consortium Director for Wayne County Community Schools. He's also trained in multi-tiered systems of support and helps to organize data, systems, practices that improve outcome and environments for young people. And with that, I'm very happy to welcome our presenters. We are going to start with Jay and then go to Autumn and then Alexius and then Ellie. And we will kick it over to you, Jay. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining.
Neora, thanks for the opportunity to be here today. I'm looking forward to learning along with everyone. And Wayne County Community Schools really started at one small school, Sodus Central School District, when we had a Safe Schools Healthy Student grant about a decade ago, partnering with another school district. And I really want to emphasize that for folks on the call is that school districts, especially if they're near one another, really can regard one another as partners, and they can be powerful partners when school districts start to work together and may find ways to get something started or hold something together that one district can't do alone. Next slide. So this is, for me, the key framing of the work, and I've heard this a couple of times recently in a couple of different ways, but this quote really is essential, and I think it's the rally point for why we need durable and sustainable approaches, because it's not just about running a good program that helps one young person, but it's about changing the environments around our young people so that we're not celebrating a success story, but we're changing the odds for everyone. Next. So to do that, we really need to be replicable. And a couple of years ago, we really started to focus on branding. So I just want to point out to you, we got Wayne County Community Schools. It's 11 stars for the 11 districts in our county. If you look, each one of the counties and then each one of our initiatives is branded in a way that brings those initiatives together and yet also has them separate so they can develop on their own. But just thoughts around sustainability and durability comes to little things like messaging. And that idea, again, of taking that ecosystem approach and making sure it's replicable. So next slide. This has been a huge blessing for us. I really want to thank IEL and the rest of the folks that made this model possible. So we went to try and explain community schools before. Everyone had a different understanding, and another huge help for our own local approach at making sure that the work we do lasts and the work we do is fundable is that it's understandable, that there's common language, and that everybody knows what they're doing. I'll often say, like, fire trucks don't pull up to a house fire and go, gosh, I hope our hoses will work on this fire hydrant. Mechanics don't get underneath the hood and hope that they have wrenches that are going to fit certain sockets. There's standardization for a purpose. So next slide. When we're talking about that, we looked at, for our own county, a way to express our vision was this collaboration arch. You'll see the whole child development there with the social, emotional, mental, and physical well-being encouraged through collaboration. We developed this from the National Child Traumatic Stress Network and Lesley University. You're going to see this picture at Williamson Middle School. You're going to see it at Wayne County Public Health. So again, replicability, durability, sustainability out of some common models. So next slide. We put that together with our multi-tiered systems of support. And the emphasis here, right, is how do you take all of this different stuff, all of the key practices that are in the community schools wheel, as I like to call it, or the essentials model. How do you organize that? And how do you help people know where to go? So when you're wanting to build durable partnerships, people need to understand what is their role in this place. And for us, if we want to sustain impact, we need to be able to put a program in a school building with the right partners, with sustainable funding in an organized fashion with clear referral structures. So to do that replicably, to me, means leaning on national models. And we have to adapt and bring those national models not up to scale, but kind of down to scale, really right down to the ground level. So we're going to move rapid fire through these next few slides, just as an example. That means mapping out which staff are doing which initiative in which district and which building. And next slide. And taking something like Get Ready to Grow, which is a regional early childhood screening tool, and making it fit in Wayne County. We've now completed thousands of early childhood screenings, and thinking cradle to career in a specific place with models like this regionally, we can pull this regional model right into our own small town. We are not Chicago. I don't have all the resources that Autumn does. So in tiny little Sodus with 1,000 kids in the school district, I need to partner with bigger folks, but I can't be run over by these bigger folks. So as we go through the next slides real quick, that means taking like Medicaid, which is a huge funding service, and working with our county mental health department, giving them space in our schools. We never touch these dollars, but our kids receive these services. Now, more than about 46% of all the services provided by Wayne County Mental Health are provided right in our school buildings. Next slide. Cool things that exist, like the Newark Pilots are like a college baseball team or a college league team that plays in the summer. They're willing to toss out free tickets for our families. So not everything has to have a huge dollar amount. Like it's 600 folks at this, and in a small town, that's a big deal. So next slide. And our study work program, I just want to close with this. and probably fast forward through the next couple of slides just to say that we managed explosive growth here by really getting very, very technical with our funding streams. So we found a demand for youth that are really at the, starting early childhood, thinking place-based, looking all the way through. How do we support our young people through school with family engagement, with mental health supports and so forth, and get them ready for career? When they got to that career entry place, it's kind of a vacuum in our county. And with that kind of demand, we really had to go all out to try and get the dollars we needed to grow. So the next slide, you can see that we've really taken time to braid tons of different funding streams from sources like DOJ, federal dollars, state dollars. Next slide. To really focus across districts. So it's not always one district getting this award. Again, our districts are partnering with each other. Sometimes Sodus will include Lions. Sometimes Lions will include Newark. We work together and we keep a singular focus. So last slide, as we believe, right, that in coming together, we can make sure we create that ecosystem that makes sure that all young people are cared for. And it's the adult's job to organize those resources, not in just a way that has them appear once, but appearing time and time again, something that they can count on. Thanks, Neora.
Oops, there's my alarm going off. Right on time, Jay. Thank you for that. And I did want to break in and just say that this is a town hall forum. And so after our panelists, we will be breaking into our network breakout rooms, and then we can go deeper into conversation about all of this. So I do see a hand raised, and if you could drop questions in the chat, that would be great so that we can try to attend to them. And then also we'll feed them to our panelists during the Q&A. So with that, we will move on to our next speaker, Autumn Berg.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so happy to be here to talk about partnerships and just community schools in general and how they don't exist unless we have partnerships. So you can go to the next slide. So just to give a high level note, many of you may know community schools in Chicago as Community Schools Initiative, and we are going through an exciting change to a new department name. So we are now the Office of Sustainable Community Schools. And a lot of their work still prioritizes investing in disinvested community. We are rooted in community strengths, and we are still a cohort-based collaborative. But this also brings into account a lot of the education and wisdom that we're learning from our community-based organizations. In addition, our model has 3 different funding sources, which was mentioned a little bit. You can go to the next slide. So we have our grant-funded community schools, which are 21st century and full service. We have our external organizations that receive additional funding that we are supporting directly. And then we have our sustainable community schools, which is our partnership between CPS and CTU. That was part of the grassroots education movement that brought it into the teachers union contract. So in Chicago, we know that community schools only exist because of our partner agencies. So in 1998, partner agencies advocated with the district, philanthropic, corporate dollars to start the community schools initiative in Chicago. And those partnerships still exist. And what we are trying to do is create spaces in our schools to convene all of the partners. And we do that through hosting leadership teams in all of our schools. While there are lead partner agencies, there are a lot of other organizations that contribute to school-based learning, after-school programs, during the school day activities. And we wanted to have a place to convene all of those partners. Because once you're convening people, it allows them to have a shared vision and goal, which then leads to sustainability and long-term impact with students and families. It also allows for there to be voices from the community that is not only from our organizations, but also those who have been stakeholders in the community for years, along with the parents and students, and they are all working together in order to create a shared movement to transform their school into a community school. When we started doing community schools a few years ago, we realized that as we're talking about community schools and partnerships, one thing that we really needed to develop was a sustainability process. We have this idea that, like, if $150,000 goes away, we're all going to work together to figure out where that money is braided together to find other resources. But we didn't have a process for that. And so what we did is we actually attended a seminar with Children's Aid Society, and we kind of hit the ground running, and we developed a very strategic plan that linked to our quality improvement process that then allowed there to be a shared ownership of sustainability in our community schools. And that allows people to start in year one talking about sustainability with their partnerships and with their external partners who have the ability to seek funding that maybe as a district we are not able to seek. So for example, there's a lot of smaller grants out there that nonprofits and community-based organizations can go after. But as a district, we are not eligible for some of those funding sources. So what we do is we support organizations who want to seek funding for specific schools by providing data, by signing MOUs, by helping them write the grants, getting information that they need internally. Because that is one area that if you have a process to support organizations, then it allows you then to sustain programs, to sustain people, to sustain partners beyond a grant or funding that has a end limit. And so that is one thing that we specifically do. In addition, we make ourselves accessible. If people are reaching out and they have questions, we do our best to hop on a call and provide information. And through that, they're able to get city dollars. They reach out to aldermen. They reach out to get smaller grants from nonprofit agencies. And what we see at the end of a grants resource is that we're really piecing things together based off the expertise of our partner agencies who are able to get smaller funding to fund very specific things that is based off of the sustainability that our schools have designed as what they want to see sustained past a grant. I'm going to end with this one story because it's a very thoughtful story that a school came up with. So our school was doing a needs assessment and they wanted to offer literacy programs for a certain grade band. They did not have funding to offer this. The school-based coordinator went back to their asset a needs assessment, and they came back to us and she said, I have an idea to ask for funding from an organization, but I need feedback to know if I can do it. And the organization was not actually an organization, it was a cemetery. There is a cemetery across the street from the school. And I said, go for it. And so she wrote a letter and she went to the cemetery and she asked the cemetery to provide funding so that she could buy books for a literacy program. And the cemetery was like blown away. They'd never been approached to support anything in education because it's a cemetery. And so that managed to fund their literacy program for 5 years. And so sometimes it's being strategic, it's thinking outside the box to bringing in those partnerships that we don't always expect.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Autumn. It's awesome to hear from the two of you and how you're applying funding differently and broadly. So we will now move on to Alexius Ferguson.
Hello, and I'm glad to be with you today. Alexius Ferguson, UCF Center for Community Schools Assistant Director. My department is a site-facing area. I'm gonna just tell a little bit about myself and then jump into the Center for Community Schools. So I started off as a site director or a coordinator, as most of you guys would call it. And I worked at a school called Webster, and I'll finish up with the story from Webster, just telling how this model really works and how it can transform schools with these tools that we're talking about today, sustainability and durability. But here at the UCF Center for Community Schools, our story started with one school. It started with Evans High School in Pine Hills community in Orlando, Florida. And we borrowed our model from the Children's Aid Society in New York and co-founded this model with the Children's Home Society. Our model is kind of a 4-core pillar, but also 4-core partner and 4-core position model. So it might be a little different than one coordinator for a feeder pattern or one coordinator per school, but it is very comprehensive and complex. We can go to the next slide. Here at the University of Central Florida Center for Community Schools, our role, we are the Technical Assistance Center, but these are some of our primary roles. We are the statewide grantor and funder for reporting and accountability. We are technical assistance, training and development, and we are also our assessment and evaluation, certification and data management. So our departments are kind of our leadership house. We have a technical assistance house that's site facing. We have a certification house that's site facing. And then we have a business house that's more of our internal business operations. Even though we are a university and associated with the university, we have university assistance as a component of what we do, but it is comprehensive in the way that we do our work. And it's a multiple core partner approach on the ground. So each of those nonprofits that we go through a planning grant process, typically about 8 per year. Each of our nonprofits on the ground are convening other partners to do this work. So it's kind of a shared governance model with a multiple core partner approach. And then to speak on the money, sustainability for me is not just about money. And I do think it's super important. You can't do this work without money. But sustainability is also the people, and hearing the people and being present for the people. And I heard that through some of the other presentations, and really raising the concerns of the people. If the people speak to certain things, you have to hear them. You have to do something with it. And it might not always be money. It might be, hey, more presence, show up more, listen to us, make sure there's a system for these things. So I think some of those things also lead to better sustainability. And then longevity. If anybody knows the key to longevity, definitely share that with us, because I think longevity is the true recipe for turnaround and for success and for outcomes. And then the other thing that we do very well here in Florida is we can speak to various audiences very well. But our story, as I'll say on the next, we can go to the next slide. Our story is captured in the Community School Revolution book. And it was available online, and I know there are free copies available, but it's in chapter 6. But one of the key recipes to the early success of us securing funding was student voice. They were the key, and students are still integrated into everything that we do. We do advocacy year round. There's a key term that we've kind of held on to is meet me before you need me. So legislators are big on that. Don't just come to me. And all of our funding, or the vast majority of our funding, comes through the Florida legislature. We do have a full service school arm, but the vast majority of our funding comes through the Florida legislature. So meet me before you need me. Don't just come to me on your CPS day at the Capitol or while we're in session asking for money. Let me see your site. Come have coffee with me at my site. At my office. Have coffee with me in the community. Meet my legislative aide. That meet me before you need me thing has been very successful for us. We've been able to build champions that advocate on our behalf and really kind of go before us. So it's been very beneficial. But I would, chapter 6 in the book there, Community School Revolution, find us. But even on chapter 8 or page 80, it talks about how students have been the key to success for us. And students, as I mentioned, are still central to the voice when we go and advocate. But really, it's not just about that one day. It's about the year-round advocacy. So we started off with a couple $100,000, and now we're at 20 million. And that's been the key. It's been stakeholder voice, it's been student voice, family voice, and making sure that everybody's been integrated in that process. And then secondly, there's 2 links down there. There's one for our website, UCF Center for Community Schools, and the second one is a publication that's been put out by our CCIE department, talking about our funding and our increase in funding and the amount of students that we'll serve because of that funding. And that wraps it up for me. Thank you, guys.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Alexius. And now we welcome Ellie Mitchell.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm so excited to be here, and I'm going to continue riffing on a theme that Alexius just started in terms of the importance of voice. And I love that meet me before you need me phrase. I just spent the morning with Baltimore City community school coordinators in training on engaging with elected officials as a community school. And I think it's super important of building those relationships. So I am Ellie Mitchell. I am the director of the Maryland Out of School Time Network. We are one of the Mott-funded statewide after school networks and the affiliate to the National After School Association, but we serve as the backbone for the Maryland Coalition for Community Schools, which we have done since 2016. So if you want to take me to the next slide. So I want to say that Maryland right now is known as a success story for community schools. We have gotten our education funding formula to fully incorporate community schools in a major way, leading to an expansion, which I'll talk about, of more than 600 community schools across the state. However, what this required is a tremendous amount of precursor. This has been an ongoing evolution from our previous funding formula, and it took a huge amount of community organizing. This has been a grassroots effort from the beginning. Community schools has been well established in Baltimore City for quite a while. I'm going to drop a timeline in the chat that gives you kind of a 20-year evolution of community schools in Baltimore, and community schools were really rooted there even before the 90s. And then we had parallel tracks in other counties in the state. So I just want to give you the feeling that as you're doing this work, sometimes you start at one place and you end up in quite another. So if you can go to the next slide. A couple of things I think that are important in this community organizing model of durability is that getting things into policies, into legislation, is the key to keeping things going forward. We started before 2016 on getting community schools as a talking point within ESSA plans. We had a Baltimore City community school policy at the district level, followed that by Prince George's community school policy that was helped pass by the teachers unions there. We did legislation that led up to the blueprint. And so when you think about sustainability and durability, you've got to go into that public policy system, and having that grassroots organizing behind it really backs that up from a long-term perspective. If you want to take me to the next slide. So this is where we are now in Maryland. We have every school in Maryland where 55% or more of the students are experiencing poverty are considered a community school. What that means is that there's a community school coordinator, a full-time community school coordinator, and a health practitioner. Those are paid for by personnel grants. There's also additional per pupil funding that is in a sliding scale, starting at 56% of the concentration of poverty to 80% plus, so that higher poverty schools receive more money than the sort of median. Well, I mean, they're all high poverty schools, but it's a sliding scale to the more extreme of the concentrations of poverty. We now have more than 600 community schools here in Maryland. And this is all in the bill. But what I'm going to say about this is that the legislation is not perfect. There are things we still want to build on, and we have to work right now to protect this legislation, continue to work on the revenue side of this work. So it's an ongoing practice that even though we've hit this success point, we can't start just looking in our backseat, say, oh, we did that, it's done. We need to work on quality, and we need to work on the implementation, and we need to work on the continued expansion and growth of this strategy in Maryland. So it's a great success story. We are super excited, and we have some at least one bullet point here to, if you want to go to the next slide, of where we're seeing some sunshine. In our highest concentration poverty schools, we had some of the greatest increases in ELA proficiency. Now, lower poverty schools had larger increases in math, but if you can see, our high poverty schools were still gaining, which has not always been the story. So we're seeing that these investments are working. You know, we can't necessarily say causation, but these kinds of data points and the continued need for us to collect stories and tell stories about community schools in Maryland is super important. And while we're talking about partnerships, I do want to shout out, and I'm going to put some more links in the chat, the fact that we are working very closely with the new Towson University Maryland Center for Community Schools and with our Maryland State Department of Education to work on the issues of implementation, quality, support to districts and to the schools themselves and the community school coordinators. A lot of this is happening in real collaboration and partnership. And so it's exciting that we can partner with the State Department and have also our local districts and also the universities and also just everybody on the same page. So, and I will actually give a shout out to Councilwoman Felicia Porter for joining me for this engaging with elected officials training I did today. We have to, at all levels, the city, state, and federal level, continue these conversations with the decision makers, make sure that they hear the voices of community school coordinators who actually have really great ideas and solutions for big policy issues like housing and other areas. So I'm really open to everyone engaging with us in the breakout sessions. I'm here to give more additional information about the blueprint if anybody wants it. It's my favorite conversation. And at that, I will pass it back so that we can go into the conversations.
Terrific. Thank you all so much. You've given us a great launching point for our Q&A and then also when we go into our breakout rooms. So we wanted to ask our panelists some questions. And if you have other questions, please drop them in the chat. Xavier is monitoring that. But we wanted to just start with this question around specific examples of braided and blended funding. Jay, you had a great slide that spoke to this, that really demonstrated all of the different funding streams that you have coming into your work. But can you share specific examples, including federal, state, local funding streams, and how they're all working together? And I can toss this to you, Jay, but anyone jump in as well.
Yeah, I can start briefly. And I think, again, what you heard from several of the panelists around shared vision and a clear model. And I think when you have that clear model, then you can ask, how can this funding stream support an aspect or a component of this model? If you look for a funding stream to fund an entire approach or an entire program, you may not find a one-for-one fit. For example, out of school time programming, it's a great place to braid and blend funding, especially to braid funding. If there is a grant for nutrition support at a local level from a local funder, that can provide a great after school nutrition lesson, which can really enrich that time. Our study work program, again, WIOA funding from the federal level, DOJ funding from the federal level, extended school day violence prevention funding from the New York State level, local investment from Wayne County, schools chipping in, and all of those don't necessarily just fund the whole study work program, but we need job coaches. We need sometimes some mental health supports for our young people. We need to be able to have paid internships. So what can this grant do? And a lot of times when you head into grant management, you head into fund management, it's very much a don't break the rules approach. And I think if you look at those obstacles, you can get stuck. So the frame of mind to have, I think, is this is the vision we have. This is the model, whether it's mentoring, whether it's after school, this is what is best practice. How can we get some of this from this funding stream or that? And to really constantly ask what can be done rather than focusing on what's prohibited.
Thank you. That's great. Do any other panelists want to weigh in on that question? Okay. So another question is around partnerships, and all of you are calling out how important it is to have strong partnerships that really create these durable community schools. And we wanted to hear about how your partnerships have evolved or strengthened as a direct result of navigating funding crises together or other crises that have really put your partnerships to the test. And what does that look like for you? And I'll direct that to anyone who wants to answer first.
I'll jump
Go
in
ahead.
first. If that, so I started this work as a site director or site coordinator with the funding cliff. And my organization at the time was Children's Home Society, and they essentially, got philanthropy dollars to cover the cost for at least 2 of our sites for 2 years, to sustain the model until we were able to get state funding. But that was collaborative. But we bought into the major vision, the statewide project with UCF. But we had the mindset of 25 years or more, and we were preaching that to the community. Obviously, it's hard to do that knowing that there's a funding cliff. But we were steadfast, and we kept working with our partners, building local stakeholders, and really moving in that direction. And it ended up being successful. Obviously, I'm still with the initiative, but it ended up being a success to us. And honestly, I think it kind of is a best practice. We don't all start that way, but I do think it's a best practice because we did all of the local sustainability efforts prior to getting funding.
Ellie, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I would say you want to, again, the focus on partnerships and relationships, right? When you hit a crisis point around funding, the more coalitions you have, the more likely you are to come out of it on the other side. And, when OST funding, after school funding, and community school funding, everybody knows the story if they've heard me say it, were first combined in Baltimore. I was a little dismayed. I was afraid of a loss of after school seats, but ultimately the relationship that we built between the OST providers and the community school implementers became a much stronger advocacy voice and a better implementation model, frankly. And so having after school and community school aligned and those practitioners together in one voice is how we saved ourselves from cuts in Baltimore when it was city funding instead of state funding. And I think as we continue, we have to have that one voice around what is great for our kids and what needs to happen. And the stronger we are is through really that coalition building. So that's how we survive some of these things.
I just wanted
go
to
ahead.
add too that I think it's also important that there's like a space for shared listening. Because partners need to be heard and listened to, because really if they're based in the community, they know more than the people that are working in the schools. And students and families need to be listened to as well. So they may have needs that they need the partner to hear. And so when there's those open lines of communication and that trust is built, that is where you really see the consistent partnerships that that tends to be more long-term because everybody feels like they have a voice at the table.
Thank you. And I think that leads into a question that did come up in the chat that I know is on many people's minds, and that is about federal funding. And if you all are having conversations about the possibility of less federal funding and how you're thinking about that, I think you're kind of getting to it and how you're answering about partnerships, but if anyone wants to speak to that.
Just real quickly, I think it's focusing on sustaining the experience that our young people are having and avoiding simply trying to maintain adult structures. So at a ground level, you know, it's what are those experiences? And that's where I'm at when I'm looking at what funds may shift away. So trying not to get caught up in all of the adult feelings and all of the adult, but what does it feel like to be that fifth grader? What does it feel like to be that parent? What's the interface that they have, and how can we come together to make sure that they don't feel it?
And the one thing I'd say is we really don't know what's going to happen. And there's a lot of power in the fact that a lot of funding at the federal level is formulaic and goes to local districts. And people have a different feel about cutting things that will end up impacting their own constituents. And so there may be more hope than people want to think about sometimes. So I'd say let's be hopeful and also leverage the power of constituency in these conversations. The other thing I would say is that states may need to be more self-reliant. And so it's also about getting creative about revenue strategies at the state and local level, and thinking about local revenue strategies might even be even more important when you're looking to fill gaps from potential things that are going to happen at the federal level. But you know, we don't have to assume though that the federal there aren't opportunities that will happen in the next 4 years.
Yeah, and I think that leads into the final question for the Q&A, which is around data. And Ellie, you had a great slide about, you know, where this is working and the kind of data and impact that you're using to show your impact. And so wanted to hear from you all about how you are demonstrating impact to secure funding. This will probably, and it's already important, but maybe even more important as we move forward. How are you telling your data stories? What metrics, success stories have been the most persuasive for your funders?
So one thing that we've been really trying to hone in on is a student's sense of belonging in community schools. It leads back to that student experience of the school day. And we've created, out of like requests from our partner agencies, like more availability to have data that is regularly updated. And what we've created is a dashboard that they have access to that shares some of that information. So every student that is connected to some work in a community school shows up on this dashboard. And what we can see is something like if they're engaged in a program, a mentoring activity, it could be even just something like a peace circle that's happening during the school day. Those students are more likely to have higher attendance, lower chronic absenteeism, and higher rates on the 5 essentials on like a student's sense of belonging. So are we able to make all of those long-term impacts on like grades right immediately? No, but you can usually see some of that growth really early on. And giving access to our partners to have more visibility helps them understand what's happening and helps them be able to like have those communications and those stories when they're like going to funders, and even talking with internal stakeholders at schools.
I'll chime in.
Okay, great.
And I saw the message in the chat too. So I'll just give one little tidbit to that. Even though I know this in some of these spaces, it's not great to say that we stay neutral, but we really stay neutral and really we keep a laser focus on the kids. But I think that's, so we do use the ABCs, attendance, behavior, and course performance as some of the metrics. And we also are also are working on data sharing agreements with each of the districts we're associated with, so that we can get student level data. But the other side of that is really what's captured in the book is student voice. It's different than a metric when it's a real person, because this person saying, this is how it impacted me. This is how it changed my life. And that makes a difference. And it doesn't happen immediately. Sometimes it takes maybe 3 years. But when a person's telling about the experience that they had, the unique experience they had, and even if it's just going from a C student to being in expanded learning programs, those little things do matter when a student advocates for themselves. So that probably has been the key that's been central throughout all the time that I've seen and that I've studied in the state of Florida.
Yeah, for me, it's being able to know the funder, like the same way you get to know people, right? And so the language I use to explain community schools and after school programming to Department of Justice is different than I use to explain it to the Office of Mental Health, is different than I use to explain it to the Department of Education, is different than I use to explain to a private funder. So what language is that funder speaking, and how can I translate the story in Wayne County into their language, and what are the metrics that are important to them? So the tough part, I think, of my job is to think of that student experience that we're trying to build at that ground level and translate it into something that makes sense to folks that are probably making a decision with a national model in mind, a policy in mind, an approach in mind. There are people that, that have a deep belief, right? Trauma informed. So, okay, so how can I explain community schools in a trauma informed lens? What is the lens they're using, and how can I articulate this experience through looking through their lens? And sometimes it means missing and getting some feedback and having a dialogue. And that's where, again, I think the durability comes in when you have multiple partners that have a shared model. There's some great work, the After School Alliance. I think about the national mentoring strategies where you can really get people to take a same practice and learn it together, whether they're school district, the community circles that Autumn was talking about. A YMCA can know those, and a school can know those, and a church can know those, and everybody can get together and sharing that practice, So I think that being able to take that experience and translate it is probably something that I'm going to be really thinking a lot about in the coming months.
Terrific. Thank you all so much. I can't thank you all enough. This has been a terrific panel.